Shoujo is a word most people watching anime likely have heard in some context or another. It simply translates to girl, and regarding anime and manga used most often to describe works with a demographic mainly consisting of girls. The probably more well-known equivalent to shoujo, consisting of works mainly aimed at boys, is called shonen, simply meaning boy in Japanese. Even if you're not familiar with any shoujo anime or manga, you've definitely seen shonen before. After all, most popular anime fall under that demographic. Anything from One Piece, Demon Slayer and Jujutsu Kaisen, over Death Note, Attack on Titan and JoJo, up to Haikyuu, Frieren, Spy Family or something like quintessential quintuplets is considered a shonen. Since I know that even though most have an idea of what an anime or manga might look or feel like when they hear the word shonen, I still think there are a lot of people who don't actually know at what point an anime or manga is considered a shonen and not a seinen or a shoujo, for example. I think in a survey with, let's say, 100 people, when asked if an anime or manga is considered a shonen or seinen, most would have no problem putting something like Naruto or Berserk in the correct category. If you would ask me what kind of story I think of whenever I hear the word shonen, then I'd probably picture a story with a most of the time male protagonist and his friends fighting against a relatively clearly defined evil antagonist with lots of amazing to look at battles and strategies, something like Bleach or Demon Slayer. For seinen, I'd picture a darker story with more mature undertones and a most of the time adult protagonist struggling in life in some way like Berserk or Monster. Like I said, these would just be my answers if I had to summarize in a few seconds what I think of whenever I hear shonen or seinen. And I think if you're familiar with these words, then you probably picture something at least somewhat resembling what I just described. Okay, so going back a few seconds, when the same people as before were asked again now to say what category Chainsaw Man, Attack on Titan and Vinland Saga belong to, I'm sure whereas before almost all 100 would have put Naruto in shonen and Berserk in seinen, now there'd be at least a few unsure as to what demographic these belong to. What I'm trying to say with all of this is that when you have an idea of what a shonen, shoujo, seinen or josei might look and feel like and aren't 100% sure as to what the exact definition is that defines an anime or manga as one of these demographics, then you'll eventually reach a point where the line between these gets so blurred that you'll think of something like Attack on Titan as more of a seinen than a shonen. Because when exclusively looking at the final season, for example, I'd say just going by my previous description of what one might picture when hearing these words, Attack on Titan's final season could easily feel more like a typical seinen than a typical shonen. If you know what defines a manga as part of a certain demographic, like shonen for example, then you're probably wondering why I waste all of this time talking about something with a clear-cut definition. But just stay with me for a moment longer. I promise me talking about all of this has a purpose. Okay, so like I said, I'm sure it's pretty obvious that something like Demon Slayer is considered a shonen, and almost any person, whether they just heard the word for the first time yesterday or have been watching anime for over a decade, can agree on Demon Slayer being a shonen. So why is Bungo Stray Dogs, for example, a seinen while Chainsaw Man is a shonen? Even though if you'd compare them to other shonen and seinen, Bungo Stray Dogs is more similar in its characters and story structure to a lot of shonen than seinen, while Chainsaw Man probably has more similarities to a lot of seinen than a shonen like Soul Eater. Without knowing what demographic these belong to, I honestly wouldn't have guessed that A Silent Voice is a shonen while Love is War a seinen, and be confused as to why JoJo's first few parts are shonen compared to the later parts, which are seinen. Okay, so finally for those of you watching this video who don't know the exact definitions of shonen, shoujo, seinen and josei, a manga is considered to be part of one of these demographics solely by the way they are published. Or to put it simply, when a manga is published in a magazine mainly aimed at boys like Shonen Jump, then it's considered a shonen regardless of its content. So you can have something like Attack on Titan, including a lot of content, themes, structure and character development not unusual for a seinen being a shonen. And on the other hand, something like Bungo Stray Dogs with traits similar more to your typical shonen, still being a seinen due to its original publication in a magazine with a target demographic consisting mostly of young men and up. This is also how you can get something like JoJo, where the earlier parts were released in Shonen Jump and are thus considered shonen, then switching its serialization during part 7 to Ultra Jump, a seinen magazine, so JoJo is technically both. There are two main reasons as to why I took this time to talk about different manga and anime and their target demographic. One is that I feel like a lot of people reading manga and of course watching anime tend to mainly watch or read different stories with the same demographic. What I mean by that is that I see a lot of people especially interested in shonen, for example, paying little to no attention to stories in the shoujo or seinen category, for example. This is not exclusive to people only watching shonen. I also see some only sticking to shoujo, for example, but I feel like it's way more common for someone, especially if they just started recently watching anime, to only stick to stories with the same target demographic, like only watching shonen anime, but it's not hard to see why. If I take shonen again as an example, I'd say about 70 to 80% of popular anime, especially looking at the last 5 years or so, count as shonen, with one's focus on action taking center stage, so it's no wonder if someone only sticks to watching similar anime. After all, there are more than enough stories you already know you're gonna enjoy, so why try out something new? Another thing is, and I don't know how common this is, but strictly speaking from personal experience, I know I also tend to watch movies and TV series with a similar genre and not really go out of my comfort zone and experience new things, at least in that regard. I, for example, don't like most romance or comedy focused movies and series and tend to watch more horror, mystery or action focused movies and TV series, so that is what I originally searched for when I got more into anime and manga. But the thing about anime and manga is, and I don't think I'm alone in thinking this, they somehow manage to make you interested in stories of all kinds of genres. Like I said, I don't like most romance and comedy movies, but some of my favorite anime are part of these genres. I absolutely love Clannad and Love is War, for example, and my favorite anime is Gintama, which, if you know anything about it, has an enormous focus on comedy. And then there is, of course, the whole reason I made this video in the first place, Fruits Basket, which also has a lot of romance and comedy. So what I'm trying to say here is that what kind of genre you like in other media, like movies or books, shouldn't influence what kind of anime you look for too much. Of course, if you're a big fan of action or romance-heavy movies, then you'll probably also like anime with a big emphasis on these. But that shouldn't prevent you from looking up anime or manga with a focus on genres you normally don't look for or enjoy that much in other media. Like I said, I myself like mystery-focused movies, for example, so I watch a lot of mystery-heavy anime like Monogatari, Steins Gate, Death Note, Attack on Titan, and even something like Durara or Bakano early on. And I think a lot of people, especially relatively new to anime and manga, started kinda similar with genres they already like and only notice after a long time they might even enjoy anime completely different to what they like in other media, like movies, for example. I said before that even though there are definitely some out there only watching shoujo, for example, I think more people than not, even if they like shoujo more than anything, still watch some shonen from time to time. While there may have been a time when shonen was almost exclusively watched by male and shoujo by female viewers, today shonen, while still being published with primarily younger male viewers in mind, is something anyone from any demographic can enjoy, and I think the same should be the case with shoujo. Now, I want to say that my experiences with who watches what kind of anime are primarily from someone who lives outside of Japan, so I don't want to say too much about what's it like in Japan when my information is mainly based on information anyone can find online, like articles and experiences from other people living there, so I don't have any personal experiences inside of Japan that I can rely on. But at least outside of Japan, I feel like while shonen is something most people interested in anime or manga read or watch at the minimum every once in a while, shoujo has a smaller casual audience only watching on occasion, and a higher percentage of people already really interested in it continuing to watch. Okay, so because I'm realizing that I'm now even confusing myself with how convoluted what I'm trying to say has become, what I want to say is someone who watches a lot of shonen, in my experience, is less likely to try out shoujo than the other way around, and that's a shame because there are so many great shoujo not getting the attention they deserve. If you're someone who watches shoujo regularly, then I obviously don't have to tell you this, but for everyone else, please watch more shoujo, or even start watching something like Fruits Basket if you haven't seen any so far. If I can convince one person previously not interested in shoujo to at least keep in mind that there are so many great stories within shoujo worth experiencing and maybe even start one show, then this video is worth it for me. Another reason I wanted to make this video is that I recently watched Fruits Basket again with someone who hasn't seen it before, and I remember just how much I love this story. I've also finally seen the movie. Making this video also has the benefit of reminding me to watch more shoujo, because while there are some I really love, I still haven't watched nearly enough shoujo. While I didn't exclusively watch shonen early on, it did still take me some time to watch more anime with genres I previously didn't like that much. And since a lot of shoujo have a bigger focus on romance or comedy than what I used to watch, none stood out to me as overly interesting, even though I did hear of the now older adaptation of Fruits Basket and Ouran High School Host Club every now and again. I think the first shoujo I watched might have been Maid-sama, and while I really liked the anime and proceeded to watch shoujo every once in a while, some good, some whatever, I still need to continue the Akatsuki no Yona manga. It wasn't until I decided to finally watch Fruits Basket with the new adaptation that I found a shoujo that I enjoyed just as much as some of my all-time favorite anime and manga. Fruits Basket is one of my favorite anime now, and I'm glad I tried to watch more shoujo, even though I still have a relatively basic understanding when it comes to them. But hey, that can change, especially since I'm more interested than ever in finding new ones that might surprise me by just how much I like them. I originally thought about making a video solely focused on Fruits Basket, and more or less describing what's it about, and sharing my thoughts about the different characters and story as a whole, as I did in previous videos, like with Mob Psycho for example. But the more I thought about how to approach such a video, the more I had to think about shoujo as a whole, and how unappreciated underappreciated a lot of shoujo are, especially in comparison with more well-known shonen. And I mean, even though I try to watch more, I'm still a good example for someone who has barely scratched the surface and seen only a tiny portion of what shoujo anime and manga might do differently narratively and on a character basis. So I might do a video solely focused on Fruits Basket in the future, perhaps when I've seen more shoujo, but for now I think I share some of the thoughts I had after rewatching the anime and finally seeing the sort of prequel movie. I think what Fruits Basket excels at are the different characters and their interactions. Fruits Basket has, of course, a narrative through line and a plot that reaches a fantastic climax in Season 3. Honestly, Season 3 has some of my favorite moments of all time, and it doesn't surprise me in the slightest that especially Season 3 is so highly regarded. But what makes Fruits Basket, and I think many will share my opinion here, are the interactions between the different characters, and especially the interactions involving the wonderful Toru. I think one of the things that makes me like Toru so much is that I'm watching, reading, and playing a lot of stories with deeply flawed characters. To go back to what I said earlier, I love Attack on Titan, Clannad, and Monogatari, for example. All three stories with a lot of depth to their protagonists, and oftentimes a lot of major issues rooted deeply within their personality. Not to spoil anything, but if you've seen any of these, you probably know how complex these protagonists can get. And I think Toru, at least on the surface and for a majority of the story, appears to stand in contrast to these protagonists by being this wonderfully optimistic and most of the time happy person, and that was one of the things that made me like her early on a lot. Just to have this generally nice person right at the center of the story, in contrast to all of the other characters and even her own hardships. This person that stays, or at least tries to have this optimistic and helpful attitude, despite being faced with all these emotionally broken characters, and doing all of this without having someone she can rely on herself after losing both her parents. Now, of course, through helping all these different people, she does gain multiple people willing to help and support her. I'm also not trying to say that she starts as this innocent, hopeful character who turns out to have some major secret that completely flips her character on the head or something. If you haven't seen Fruits Basket before, I'm not implying any huge changes in her character, but what I will say is that while she might appear as more of a contrast to characters with deeply rooted problems in them like Eren, Tomoya, or Koyumi, like mentioned before, than she really is, I think what ultimately made me appreciate Toru as a protagonist even more, and once again no spoilers, is that while she does appear to be kind of a contrast to a lot of protagonists and stories I'm more used to, as a relatively hopeful and cheerful person, and therefore might seem a bit shallow at first, she, like my favorite character Gintoki for example, has a personality that stays largely the same throughout the series, but you get more and more information into how these characters think and how past and present events might affect them, despite not showing much of a difference in their behavior on the surface and in interactions with others. What I'm saying is that I like Toru right from the start, and I think she's the perfect protagonist for this sort of story, but I also love how the focus in the story shifts to be more about her the more the story advances, and of course everything regarding the problems inside the Soma family. And while I'm already talking about them, I think Fruits Basket has a wonderful cast of characters. Everyone from Toru and her friends up to the characters with only a handful of appearances in the story is written really interesting. I think the shift from a lot of interesting and completely different characters to a smaller, more focused look at what defines each of them, especially important Soma family members like Kyo and Yuki, and of course Toru herself, was handled nicely throughout the first two seasons, up to season 3, which is a lot more focused on different conflicts between the characters, now that you know why the characters are the way they are. I don't want to say too much about why there might be a lot of conflict and drama in Fruits Basket. Honestly, if you know nothing about the anime or manga, just go and watch the first episode and see if the concept of the story seems at least a tiny bit interesting to you, and if it does, even if not, I would suggest watching the anime. I think Fruits Basket has some of my favorite dramatic moments, and I don't mean a necessary or forced drama just to have some sort of conflict in a series like a lot of anime, especially slice of life tend to have, where it's oftentimes based exclusively on misunderstandings. I honestly think some stories should just stay without any drama and not force it if it seemingly doesn't serve any purpose, despite creating some sort of artificial conflict that then can be resolved in some way just to try to create a plot point that can serve as a climax to a season or story as a whole. I think a lot of slice of life are guilty of doing that, and while I don't think that Fruits Basket does everything 100% perfectly, I think it does create and handle conflict and drama in a meaningful way, and that leads to some of my favorite moments in anime, especially one in season 3 that, even though you knew were coming eventually, still managed to play out different to what you may have imagined. And while I'm already there, I think while Fruits Basket has countless interesting characters, the two that stand out the most to me, for obvious reasons, are the other two most important characters next to Toru, Kyo and Yuki. I think both of them are absolutely fantastic. Kyo is also my favorite character in Fruits Basket, and both of them are a lot more complex than one might imagine at the start of the story. I'm not the biggest fan of love triangles or similar tropes, but while the relationship between these three might appear to become that at the beginning of Fruits Basket, I'm glad it's so much more than that, and that's not what the story is ultimately building up to like a lot of other stories featuring a similar constellation of main characters. Like I said, I don't have enough experience with Shoujo to point out what Fruits Basket might be doing differently than when I would compare shonen with each other, but I think it doesn't matter if you haven't seen a single shoujo or a big fan but haven't seen Fruits Basket yet. Whatever might be the case, please just watch it. I can almost guarantee that it'll ultimately turn out to be worth your time. But even early on, I think Fruits Basket is just really enjoyable, and if you haven't seen many shoujo or drama heavy stories with some romance, then it's definitely good to try out these new anime or manga. I think that even though you might not be interested in a certain kind of genre or stories with a target demographic you're not a part of, anime and manga can somehow still manage to make that sort of story interesting to you, even though you expect absolutely nothing. If you don't like Fruits Basket, maybe try out another shoujo or drama focused story. The same for people who don't like action or shonen. Maybe you tried watching something like One Piece and didn't like it at all. That doesn't have to mean that another action heavy shonen like Hunter x Hunter couldn't still, against all expectations, turn out to be your new favorite anime. All in all, I think that of course having an open mind can be helpful in a lot of things, and when it comes to fictional stories, and especially anime and manga, or even story heavy games, even if you expect nothing, why not try out at least a few stories you wouldn't have otherwise? I heard good things about the original adaptation of Fruits Basket, and later about the first season of the new adaptation. I thought, why not give it a try, and now it's one of my favorite anime. Maybe I'll still do a video only dedicated to Fruits Basket in the future, I'm not sure yet. There's so much you can talk about when it comes to stories like this, especially from the point of view of someone not used to these types of anime and manga. But for now, I think I still need to catch up on other anime and manga, and I still haven't continued reading Akatsuki no Yona, even though I've been wanting to for years now. I know this video is all over the place, but I hope I haven't bored you too much. Anyway, I wish you a great rest of the day, and bye.